double line in this Y-shaped area, and then there was a single line through here. So all of those polylines need to be defined as break lines. A common mistake there is to define the red stuff as break lines, draw the T watercourse lines, but then forget to add them to the surface. So yeah, you drew them, but then you forgot to use them on the surface definition. So that was a common mistake. Or not drawing them at all was the other thing, right? So there was a mark for drawing them on the right layer, color, line type, and then mark. Okay? So make sure you define all your point groups, make sure you define all your break lines, and then the boundary. Okay? And I hope, did everybody use the technique I described? Remember I made a copy of the embankment lines on the outside? Remember I made a copy of this? Copied it over 2000, closed it up, and then brought it back? Yeah, okay, good. That's one way of doing it. That's the way I do it. There's more than one way to do everything, but that's a pretty handy technique. Moving stuff out of the way to a known location and moving it back. Okay, so kind of undoing the move or the direction. So how would I add the T-course as a break line if I already drew it? So if you drew this in the drawing, right, you just drew it and you've already got break lines added, right? So these might be just the red ones. You could just right click and add some more, right? Make sure you use the proximity, say okay, and add more. And then you'll see, oh, looks like you did it twice, so that's fine. There's some break lines here and some here. So you could define the break lines that you were provided with and then draw some more and then define those. Or you could draw the additional ones and define them once and for all. The effect is the same, right? Whether you add them, you know, a couple at a time, or first few and then the next, or you draw them all first, right, by inserting and then drawing, you know, it doesn't really matter. Okay? So the order doesn't matter. The boundary we talked about, and then if you go to the surface properties under definition, under the build command, in here you should have the, sorry, not build, the data operations. Analysis. Maybe I didn't do it. Definition, build, yeah. Nothing, so you want to turn this on, and you want to turn this on, and say nothing less than, you know, the low part of the data and nothing greater than the high part of the data. And this was unique. It depended on which topo you did. Okay. The way to find out what those numbers are, again, if you go back, cancel. If you go back to your points and you look at all the points, if you sort them by elevation, you'll see where the zeros are. So in my case, anything less than even 1 meter will get rid of all the zeros. And then if I sort it top to bottom, anything greater than 200 or 1,000, right? Anything, any number that gets this out of range. So I can use 10 and I can use 200. So then I go back to my existing properties and go back to my build. Right? Get rid of everything less than 10. That'll get rid of all the zeros. And get rid of everything greater than 200 or even 1,000. It'll get rid of that odd point at the top. Okay? Sorry, 200. You say okay, and if you do that correctly, when you look at the surface, that's probably just off. My layers. Gem. There's my surface, and when you look at it in 3D Object Viewer, you'll see a few things. Now, some of you might see something like this. See the streak through here? If that's true, it means you may have defined some of the sewer lines as break lines. Remember, you don't want to use those, right? So I left that in there intentionally. Why are these warning messages? Why are there warning messages when correcting for spikes? Because it's telling you, hey, you have data that you defined, and now you're eliminating some of it. Do you really want to do this? Okay? So you will get warnings occasionally along the way, but they're just letting you know technically things are happening, but we're accepting them. Okay, so a lot of the warnings we don't need. Okay, if you have warnings and you're not sure, you can ask me, but generally we can ignore a lot of the warnings. So that's what the surface looks like. Okay, and then again, you had a different style and so on. So if you did all that, when I look at, and this is how I marked it, right? I look at it in 3D, Object Viewer. I look at it in 3D. I take a quick look. I can tell whether your break lines are defined or not. The roads should have that arrowhead pattern, right? You can see that nice and clean here, all the way along the road, that arrowhead shape. The water course should be nicely defined. You can see mine isn't, right? These points are not connected with a nice smooth line in the invert of the creek. And even in here, it looks kind of jagged, right? So my break lines are not all complete. I added some, but I didn't draw some, so they're still missing. Also, why are there error messages for the water course break line? When you define them, sometimes if you have more than one and they're touching, that have a common point, it thinks that they're intersecting, so it gives you warnings as well. For the most part, the stuff I've asked you to do, you don't have to worry about it. Okay? All those areas you can ignore. Okay, so now this is the surface going forward. Now that you have this surface and it's good to go, you can now carry on. If you don't like that error there, I think it's because, again, I had these layers on, so let me do this again. I should have the center line, the shoulder, the edge of pavement, and the embankment layer. These are the only break lines. So let me just fix this. If you had that weird line kind of through it, I'm going to delete the break lines, delete, say yes. Again, I'm still missing the, and then if you see these warnings, again, hey, you changed some of the data, it wants to know whether you should rebuild it. If you don't want to be warned on the surface, you could set this to automatic. So every time you make a change, it'll automatically rebuild. So finally, I'm going to add break lines, make sure they're always proximity, say okay, select everything, and that should fix it all. I'll just turn everything on. And if you don't see the surface when you turn everything on, you might have to regenerate the view. Okay, and now it fixed that problem. Remember that weird kind of shape through here? It's now gone. So this is how I mark it. I look at everybody's, in 3D, and I make sure, I can tell there's no spikes. Everything looks pretty good. Okay. The other stuff, if you didn't get perfect on the other stuff, it's mostly cosmetic. It's really, did you follow instructions or didn't you? Okay. So if you didn't get something and you're not sure, and there's time, I can answer some questions later. But I want to get started today with the next assignment so people can get going. And then if there's any individual questions, you can ask them during class, or we can have a private chat. All right, assignment 2. So I'm going to close this now. Say yes.